Why did the scope tremble just slightly, even though her breathing was perfectly still? 17 hours in the dirt had erased sensation from Kira Blackwood's legs. Hunger was gone. Thirst had turned abstract. Time had dissolved into a slow pulse that matched the desert wind. 2.5 miles away, headlights sliced through the New Mexico night. 3 SUVs crawling toward an abandoned missile complex that should have been empty. It was. She knew those vehicles, knew the spacing, the discipline, the way they moved like one organism. She also knew the man stepping out of the lead truck, Declan Ashford, senior chief. The man who still wore 2 sets of dog tags. One was his. The other belonged to a woman he believed had been buried under concrete 3 years ago. Sorry. Kira didn't blink as she watched them form up. 8 operators. Her operators. Men she had trained. Men she had loved like blood. Men walking into a trap designed years before they ever received the mission brief. She could leave. The proof was already secured. Financial trails, intercepts, names. 3 years of hunting ghosts across continents while the world thought she was dead. She could disappear again, let history repeat itself, let another team vanish into classified silence. Her finger rested against the trigger guard, not pressure, memory. Then the radio crackled, not her team's frequency. Another one, Russian, calm, expectant. "They are here." A second voice answered, American female, cold. "Good, no survivors this time." Kira's jaw tightened. The first explosion hit before the team reached cover. Metal screamed, fire clawed at the sky. Declan hit the ground, already shouting orders, already bleeding time. Kira watched with a sniper's detachment and a daughter's dread as the kill box snapped shut around them. This wasn't chaos, it was choreography. She tracked muzzle flashes, counted positions, 18 hostiles, professional, military trained. Bait. Her team had been sent here to die. Her father's voice surfaced uninvited, like it always did when the choice hurt. Family is not the blood you are born with. It is the blood you are willing to spill for. Kira exhaled. "Forgive me, Papa," she whispered. Then she fired. The shot crossed impossible distance, threaded wind and darkness, and ended a life before the man ever knew he was seen. The effect was immediate. Confusion rippled. Declan froze, staring at a body that shouldn't have fallen that way. Kira switched frequencies, one they hadn't used since Albuquerque. Her voice slid through the static, quiet and familiar. "Phantom to preacher, you still owe me $20. Somewhere below, a grown man dropped to his knees. And the dead came back to life. What does it feel like to hear a voice you buried 3 years ago? Declan couldn't breathe. Garrett's rifle sagged. Thorne closed his eyes like a prayer had just been answered too violently to comprehend. For a heartbeat, no one moved, not because they didn't trust the voice, but because trusting it hurt too much. Another hostile fell, then another. Questions later, Kira said. "Move, Echo 7, I've got you." They moved because they always had when she told them to. Because grief had trained them to obey even hope. From her vantage point, Kira worked with mechanical precision. Each shot carried restraint. No wasted motion. No anger yet. She wasn't here for revenge. Not tonight. She was here to keep them alive. As they consolidated inside the rusted processing structure, she listened to their breathing over the open channel, heard the strain, the disbelief, the guilt. "How are you alive?" Declan finally asked. A pause. "The building didn't fall all at once," she said. "There was a tunnel. I crawled for 8 hours." She didn't mention the darkness, or the certainty that she'd die forgotten, or the transmission she intercepted a day later, an American voice ordering her eliminated if she survived. Some truths could wait. Inside the building, the tension broke open. Thorne confessed what he'd never said, that he'd seen movement in the rubble, that he'd chosen the living over a ghost. Declan's fury cracked the air. Kira cut through it gently. You made the right call. Silence. You saved them, she continued. That's command. Something in Thorne finally loosened. Then the real truth surfaced. The mission was fake, fabricated intelligence, signed off by the highest levels. A name surfaced that turned the room cold. Admiral Thomas Graves. The man who'd pinned medals on her chest, who spoken at her memorial, who ordered her father killed 20 years ago. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It never had been. Hold for 20 minutes, Kira said. I'm going hunting. She went alone. Not because she didn't trust them. Because she'd been alone for 3 years, and she knew how to survive that way. Why does darkness feel familiar when you've lived in it long enough? The tunnel swallowed Kira whole. Emergency lights painted everything red, old blood, old secrets. Her pistol felt heavier down here. Closer, personal. She moved without sound, without thought. The first man never turned. The second barely had time to understand fear. She followed voices, Russian, English, layers of betrayal woven into radio static. Then the chamber opened, and Dmitri Volkov waited. Older, slower, still deadly. They spoke of her father like men discussing weather, of execution, of lies sold as patriotism. Then a second presence stepped from the shadows. Colonel Rebecca Hart. American decorated traitor. The math turned ugly. Kira moved anyway. Gunfire shredded the silence. Hart went down screaming. Volkov disappeared behind steel. The fight that followed had nothing to do with nations or orders. It was bone and breath and 20 years of unfinished grief. They fought like reflections, trained by the same brutality, driven by different truths. When Kira finally dragged him down, breath crushed from his lungs, she demanded a name. He smiled. Ask Graves. The weight of it hit harder than any blow. Behind her, Hart laughed and confessed everything. Her father hadn't betrayed anyone. He'd been deep cover, exposing moles, dying for it. Kira sat there shaking, not from pain but from release. Her father hadn't failed. He'd been betrayed. Footsteps approached. Garrett appeared, rifle steady. You okay? She nodded. No, she corrected, but I will be. They dragged the past back into the light. What happens when the mission ends, but the war does? The extraction came under fire. They held together, older scars reopened, new ones earned. When the helicopters finally lifted, Kira felt something she hadn't allowed herself in years. Relief. Not victory. Just relief. In the hospital, she refused treatment until everyone else was stable. Some habits didn't die, even when you did. Evidence moved fast, too fast. CIA, NCIS, names unraveling like thread pulled from rot. Graves fought, denied, threatened. Then the weight of truth crushed him. Life imprisonment. No parole. The Medal of Honor ceremony felt unreal, the applause hollow. She wore the medal because others had died without one. At Arlington, she finally cried. Not loudly. Just enough. What do you do after vengeance no longer defines you? The question haunted her more than gunfire ever had. She sat with her team, ate, laughed, remembered. She returned her dog tags to her neck. Not as a symbol of death, but of return. Kira Blackwood had spent years as a phantom. But dignity doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand recognition. Sometimes dignity simply survives. Sometimes it waits. And sometimes it comes back from the dead, not to destroy, but to protect. Because strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it lies in the dirt for 17 hours and chooses to stand up anyway. What does it do to a man when the dead speak and sound exactly like home? For a moment after her voice cut through the chaos, Declan Ashford forgot how to move. The battlefield didn't pause, didn't soften. Rounds still cracked against concrete. Dust still rained from fractured steel. But inside his chest, something split open that had been sealed shut for 3 years. Phantom. The name echoed louder than gunfire. Garrett Vaughan's hands stopped shaking. Not gradually, not with effort. They just stopped. His breathing hitched once, sharp and ugly, like a sob strangled before it could escape. He pressed his forehead to the stock of his rifle, eyes burning, vision blurring, because if he looked up and she wasn't real, if this was just another hallucination born from guilt, he wasn't sure he'd survive it. Thorne didn't move at all. He stood frozen behind the corroded tank, medical pack open at his feet, fingers hovering uselessly over gauze and morphine. He'd seen ghosts before. Every medic did. But this one had a voice. Calm, familiar, forgiving. Dalton laughed. It came out wrong. Too sharp, too loud, edged with hysteria. But it was the sound of a man whose mind was tearing itself apart trying to reconcile miracle with reality. "That's not possible," he said, more to himself than anyone else. That's not how physics works." Another shot rang out. Another hostile dropped in the darkness beyond the broken walls. "Focus," Kira's voice said, steady as it had ever been. "They're repositioning east. You've got a flanker moving high ground bearing 085. Garrett, don't chase him. Let him commit." Garrett lifted his rifle on instinct, adjusted, waited. The hostile appeared exactly where she said he would. Garrett fired once. The man fell. Garrett exhaled a breath he'd been holding for 3 years. "She's real," he whispered. Declan forced himself back into command. That was the only way to survive this, by doing what he'd always done. Compartmentalize now, feel later, if later came at all. "Phantom," he said, voice tight but controlled. "We're cut off, jamming's holding, we've got wounded." "I know," she replied. "I've been listening since before the first explosion." That landed heavier than it should have. "You knew this was coming," Thorne said quietly. "Yes." No apology, no explanation yet. Just truth. Another explosion rocked the far end of the complex, closer now. Dust filled the air, choking and metallic. The enemy was probing, testing responses, trying to understand what had shifted. Professional forces didn't panic, but they noticed when the math stopped working. Declan scanned his team. 8 men in varying states of shock and resolve. They were alive, but barely. And every one of them was looking toward the darkness like it might speak again. "Kira," he said, using her name for the first time since Albuquerque. "How many?" 18 total when the ambush started. 3 down, 2 repositioning. The rest are tightening the noose. Volkov is coordinating personally. The name hit them like a physical blow. Garrett swallowed hard. "He's here." "Yes." Silence followed, not fear, not disbelief. "Hate." "He's mine," Garrett said before he could stop himself. "No," Kira replied gently, "he's not." Garrett clenched his jaw, said nothing. "Here, what's going to happen," Kira continued. "You're going to fall back to the processing building. It's structurally compromised but defensible. Thorne, you'll have hard cover and space to work. Dalton, you'll get a clearer line on the jammer." "And you?" Declan asked. A pause. "I'll keep them busy." He knew that tone. It was the same one she used when she'd already made a decision and didn't want to argue about it. "Negative," he said immediately. "You're not doing this alone." "Kentucky wind says otherwise," she replied, a faint edge of humor. "Move now." They moved. Because they trusted her. Because they always had. Because somewhere deep down, they knew this wasn't just a rescue. It was a reckoning. As they advanced through shattered concrete and rusted steel, Kira worked like an unseen hand. Every hostile who tried to flank, every shooter who thought he'd found an angle gone. Clean, efficient, almost merciful. Declan felt the weight of it press into his chest. She'd been doing this alone. For years. Phantom, Dalton said over comms, fingers flying across his array even as blood soaked his pant leg. I'm seeing something weird. The jammer signal, it's not coming from local equipment. Keep going, Kira said. Tell me when you know more. They reached the processing building under cover of her fire. Thorne dragged Dalton into position and went to work, hands steady, jaw set. Muscle memory took over. Save the living. Breathe later. Garrett took over watch, eyes sharper than they'd been since before the night he froze. Declan keyed his mic again. Kira, he said quietly, how are you really alive? The silence stretched longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice carried something different, not weakness. Wait. The building didn't collapse all at once, she said. There was a lower level, a drainage tunnel. I crawled through absolute darkness with broken ribs and a concussion. I don't remember parts of it. No one spoke. When I surfaced, you were gone. Thorne's hands faltered for half a second. Why didn't you contact us later? Garrett asked. His voice wasn't accusing, just broken. Because 24 hours later, Kira said, I intercepted a transmission, an American voice, using our frequencies, ordering my elimination if I'd survived. The words hung in the air like smoke. Dalton stopped typing. Declan felt something cold settle in his stomach. Someone on our side wanted you dead, Declan said. Yes. And tonight, Thorne asked, this mission. Fabricated, Kira replied. No weapons cache, no legitimate intel. You were sent here as bait. Dalton's screen lit up. I cracked it, he said hoarsely. Mission authorization chain. It's signed at the highest level. Declan already knew. Say it. Dalton swallowed. Admiral Thomas Graves. The name carried history, prestige, trust. And rot. The man who had spoken at Kira's memorial. The man who had shaken Declan's hand and thanked him for his service. He knew I survived Albuquerque, Kira said. He's known for years. Tonight was supposed to finish it. Garrett let out a slow, disbelieving laugh. So that's it, that's what we're worth, loose ends. No, Kira said, you're witnesses. Another explosion rattled the building. They're regrouping, Garrett reported. They're getting cautious. They should be, Kira replied. Volkov doesn't like variables. Declan closed his eyes for half a second, then opened them. Tell us what you need, he said. Not orders, trust. A long pause. Hold for 20 minutes, she said finally. Dalton breaks the jammer you call extraction. I'll draw Volkov out. You're hurt, Thorne said. A softer pause. I've been worse. Declan pressed his palm against the dog tags beneath his armor. Her tags, her weight. Come back, he said quietly. She didn't answer right away. I didn't survive being dead, she said at last, to disappear again. Then the line went silent. Outside, the desert swallowed her footsteps. And for the first time in 3 years, Kira Blackwood stopped running from the past and walked straight toward it. Why does the past always wait until you're finally tired enough to face it? The tunnel entrance yawned like an open wound in the earth, jagged concrete framing a darkness so complete it seemed to drink the light around it. Kira Blackwood didn't hesitate. Hesitation was for people who still believed there was a version of the future where this ended gently. She slipped inside, the world narrowing to breath, motion, and sound. Down here the air smelled old, rust, oil, decades of abandonment layered with something fresher. Sweat, gunpowder, fear. Emergency lights flickered red along the curved walls, each pulse like a heartbeat that didn't belong to her. Her pistol stayed high, suppressed, 12 rounds left. Enough. She moved the way she always had in close spaces, slow, deliberate, listening more than looking. Every footstep placed with care, every breath controlled. Her father had taught her this long before uniforms, long before flags and orders. Darkness is not the absence of light, he'd said. It's the presence of opportunity. She felt it now, the quiet before confrontation, the certainty that something irreversible waited ahead. A voice echoed faintly down the tunnel, Russian, calm, commanding. Dmitry Volkov wasn't hiding. He wanted her to come. Kira advanced anyway. She passed two bodies along the way. One slumped awkwardly against the wall, neck bent at an angle that told its own story. Another sprawled face down, radio still crackling with unanswered calls. Volkov's men were disciplined, but discipline frayed fast when leadership faltered. Fear spread faster than orders. The tunnel opened into a wider chamber, a maintenance hub carved from concrete and steel. Massive gears lined the walls like the skeleton of a long-dead machine. Red light washed everything in the color of blood. And there he stood. Dmitry Volkov looked smaller than memory had preserved him. Older, 60, maybe more. Gray threaded his hair, lines carved deep around eyes that had never learned regret. But the stillness was the same, the patience of a predator who had survived long enough to believe he always would. Kira Blackwood, he said, pronouncing her name carefully as if tasting it. You look exactly like your father did when I met him. Her weapon didn't waver. You murdered him, she said. He betrayed his country. He told the truth. Volkov smiled faintly. In my world, those are often the same thing. She took a step forward, another. You've been hunting me, he continued. Across continents, through shadows. I wondered how long it would take before grief outweighed caution. I'm not here for grief. No, he agreed. You're here for closure. A sound behind her. Kira turned, pistol snapping up, instinct screaming, and found herself staring down the barrel of another gun. Colonel Rebecca Hart stood 10 meters away, stance perfect, expression composed despite the sweat glistening at her temple. American uniform, American accent, American betrayal. I really hoped you'd stay dead, Hart said. The math collapsed instantly. 2 enemies, 2 weapons, no clean angles. Kira's mind raced, not in panic but in cold calculation. Distances, cover, timing, pain tolerance. Hart continued speaking, almost conversational. Your father was going to expose everything. Decades of work, careers, alliances. I couldn't allow that. You gave him to Volkov. I gave him to history, Hart replied. And I gave you the same courtesy in Albuquerque. Something inside Kira went quiet. She moved. Not forward, sideways. The first shot hit Hart's shoulder, spinning her off balance. The second was meant for Volkov, but he was already moving, diving behind one of the massive gear assemblies as bullets sparked against steel. The chamber erupted into chaos. Hart screamed, scrambling for her fallen pistol. Kira kicked it away without looking, firing again to keep Volkov pinned. The Russian returned fire blindly, rounds chewing concrete inches from her head. Kira rolled, came up hard, pain flaring as her shoulder slammed against rusted metal. She ignored it. Pain was information, nothing more. Face me, she shouted. This is what you wanted. Slowly, deliberately, Volkov stepped out from cover. His weapon was holstered. He rolled up his sleeves. Your father asked me for the same thing, he said. A fair fight. Kira holstered her pistol. Logic screamed at her to shoot him where he stood, end it, walk away. But this wasn't about logic. This was about a debt written in blood and memory. They closed the distance. Volkov moved first, fast, brutal, his strike aimed at her throat. Kira slipped it by millimeters, drove an elbow into his ribs. The impact landed solid, but he absorbed it, wrapped her arm, and used her momentum to throw her into the machinery. Metal screamed. Stars exploded behind her eyes. She tasted blood. Then she smiled. She ducked his next blow, slammed her knee into his thigh, targeting nerve and muscle. He grunted, staggered, and she followed with 3 sharp strikes to his face, precise, punishing. But Volkov wasn't just strong. He was experienced. He caught her wrist, twisted, slammed her face first into the concrete. "Your father fought like this," he said, boot pressing into her neck. "Technique without savagery." Her fingers found something cold and sharp on the floor. She drove it backward into his calf. Volkov howled, stumbling away as she rolled free and came up breathing hard, blood streaking her face. They circled each other now, both wounded, both unwilling to yield. In the distance, gunfire echoed. Her team was still holding. She couldn't fail them. Volkov seemed to read the thought. "They're running out of time," he said, just like he did. Rage surged, hot, overwhelming, but her father's voice cut through it. "Control, Kira. Let it fuel you, not consume you." She breathed. Then she attacked. The next moments blurred into pure violence, bone against bone, breath stolen. Pain layered upon pain. She broke ribs. He dislocated her shoulder. She split his eyebrow. He crushed her forearm. And then an opening. Volkov overextended. His wounded leg betrayed him. Kira sidestepped, caught his arm, and drove him face first into the floor. She was on his back in seconds, her good arm locking around his throat. "Yield," she hissed. He laughed wetly. "You think this ends with me?" "I want the name," she said. "Who's above Hart?" His struggles weakened. "Ask him," Volkov whispered. "Ask Graves." His body went limp. Kira released him, slumping against the wall, chest heaving. The truth crashed over her in waves. Her father hadn't betrayed anyone. He'd been betrayed by his own. Behind her, Hart laughed weakly, blood at the corner of her mouth. "Operation North Star," she said. "God, I never thought I'd hear that again." Kira turned slowly. "My father was not a traitor," she said. "No," Hart admitted. "He was the best asset we ever had, and the most dangerous." Footsteps echoed at the tunnel entrance. Garrett Vaughn emerged, rifle raised, eyes scanning. "Sorry I'm late," he said. "Senior Chief sent me to make sure you didn't do anything reckless." Kira looked at the unconscious man on the floor, at the bleeding woman against the wall, at her own shaking hands. "Too late," she said softly. Garrett moved to secure the prisoners. As he did, Kira closed her eyes for one brief moment. 20 years of lies had finally cracked. And above them, her team was still fighting, buying her the time to finish what the past had started. What does survival sound like when it's no longer quiet? It sounded like rotors. Distant at first, almost imagined, then louder, cutting through gunfire, through shouts, through the metallic ring of spent casings striking concrete. The sound reached Kira Blackwood before it reached hope, before it reached relief. Because hope had a way of arriving late, usually after the damage was done. She emerged from the tunnel into a world on fire. The processing building had become a choke point of smoke and shattered steel. Muzzle flashes stuttered in the half-light, sharp and violent. Declan's voice carried over comms, controlled, hoarse, still commanding even as exhaustion pressed down on him like a physical weight. "Contact West, they're probing again. Reaper, don't overextend." "I've got eyes," Garrett replied, steady now, too steady, the calm that came when fear had burned itself out. Kira didn't announce herself. She didn't need to. The team felt her presence the way you feel pressure change before a storm breaks. She dragged Volkov's limp body behind cover, zip-tying his wrists with practiced efficiency despite the screaming protest of her dislocated shoulder. Hart followed, secured, bleeding, still defiant in the way only true believers ever were. Thorne saw them first. "Phantom's back," he said into the mic, disbelief and awe tangled together. "She's got Volkov." The effect was immediate, not cheers, not celebration. Resolve. Dalton let out a breath he'd been holding for far too long. Garrett shifted position instinctively, placing himself between Kira and the darkest approach. Declan didn't turn right away, didn't allow himself the distraction, but the corner of his mouth lifted just enough to be real. "Secure the prisoners," he ordered. "Extraction is 11 minutes out." 11 minutes. An eternity. Kira picked up a fallen rifle, tested the weight, the balance. Familiar, comforting. She moved to the eastern edge of the structure, ignoring the pain screaming through her shoulder and forearm. Pain could wait. Pain always waited. "How many left?" she asked. 15, maybe 20, Declan replied. "They're desperate." "They've lost leadership," she said. "That makes them dangerous and sloppy." As if to prove her point, a hostile broke cover too early. Kira dropped him with a single shot before he could even finish raising his weapon. She didn't feel satisfaction. Just necessity. Garrett fell in beside her without a word, matching her movements, covering angles she didn't even have to look at anymore. Student and teacher, past and present collapsing into muscle memory. For a few seconds they worked like they used to, before guilt, before graves. Then Dalton's voice cut through the rhythm. "Senior Chief, Phantom, I'm through the jammer. We've got a clean channel." Declan keyed the mic immediately. "Command, this is Bravo Actual. We are under sustained attack at grid." Static, then a voice, calm, controlled. "Bravo Actual, extraction inbound. 2 birds, 4 minutes." 4 minutes. Kira exhaled slowly. "Volkov's men will make a final push," she said. "They won't want to leave him." Almost on cue, gunfire intensified. Hostiles surged from the shadows, no longer cautious. Rage and fear drove them now, not planning. "Hold," Declan barked. "Hold the line." They did. Because they had to. Thorne worked under fire, patching wounds, dragging the injured back into cover, refusing to let anyone bleed out on his watch. Dalton kept feeding updates despite the blood soaking his bandage. Garrett fired until his barrel smoked, movements precise, unhesitating. And Kira moved like something unleashed. Every shot mattered, every step calculated. She felt the team around her like extensions of her own body, and for the first time since Albuquerque, she wasn't alone inside her own head. The enemy broke first. It wasn't dramatic, no final stand, no speeches. Just men realizing the math no longer favored them. They scattered. The helicopters appeared over the horizon, black shapes against a sky beginning to lighten at the edges. Dawn was coming whether anyone was ready or not. "Move the prisoners," Declan ordered. They did, dragging Hart and Volkov toward the landing zone as rotor wash kicked dust and debris into the air. Kira kept her rifle trained outward, scanning for threats that never came. Inside the Blackhawk, the noise was deafening. The smell, oil, blood, sweat, was familiar in a way she hadn't realized she missed. She sat heavily on the bench, finally letting Thorne look at her injuries. He winced audibly as he reset her shoulder. "You're a mess," he muttered. "You should see the other guy." Declan sat across from her, eyes never leaving her face as if she might fade if he blinked. "You were alone for 3 years," he said quietly. She nodded. "I thought you were dead." That landed between them, heavy and unspoken. Dalton broke the silence. Phantom, I'm picking up an encrypted transmission, same frequency Hart was using." Every muscle in the cabin tightened. "Source?" Kira asked. Dalton's fingers flew, then stilled. It's my gear," he said slowly. "But the timestamp, this was sent during the firefight." "What does it say?" Declan demanded. Dalton swallowed. "Graves compromised, need extraction. It's an SOS, sent to a Pentagon contact." Kira closed her eyes briefly. "You weren't betraying us," she said. "Your system auto-triggered when it detected keywords." Garrett let out a shaky laugh. "So we're not getting hunted mid-flight." Not today, she replied. The helicopter banked toward the rising sun. Light spilled into the cabin, painting everything gold and raw. Volkov stirred. His eyes met Kira's. There was no hatred there now, just tired recognition. "Your father told me something," he said hoarsely. She leaned closer. "What?" "That truth always surfaces, that no lie stays buried forever." A pause. "I thought he was wrong." "Will you testify?" she asked. Another pause, longer. "Yes," he said finally, "not for justice, for him." The helicopter touched down at the hospital less than an hour later. Everything after blurred, gurneys, lights, antiseptic. Kira refused treatment until every member of her team had been seen. Thorne eventually cornered her and didn't give her a choice. As he worked, she stared at the ceiling and thought about her father, about promises made in quiet rooms, about how close she'd come to dying without anyone ever knowing the truth. Declan appeared in the doorway later, coffee in hand, exhaustion carved into every line of his face. "Wire's stable," he said. "Reaper's already asking when he can get back in the field." She smiled faintly. "Figures." Then his expression turned serious. "Graves will fight this," he said. "He has friends." "So did my father," Kira replied. "It didn't save him." She reached into her vest and pulled out a battered hard drive. "3 years of evidence," she said. "Everything I gathered while I was dead." Declan stared at it. This could burn the entire command structure. "It should," she said simply. He nodded once. Outside, dawn fully broke. And for the first time in years, Kira Blackwood wasn't running from the future. She was walking straight into it, eyes open, wounds exposed, truth in hand. Sometimes redemption doesn't feel like relief. Sometimes it feels like responsibility. What happens after the gunfire stops, but the truth is still loud? The hospital wing never really slept. Machines hummed. Shoes whispered against tile. Somewhere down the hall, someone cried into a phone, trying to turn fear into reassurance. Kira Blackwood lay awake beneath fluorescent lights, her arm immobilized, ribs wrapped, body aching in the dull, persistent way that came after adrenaline abandoned you. This was the part no one warned you about. Not the pain. The quiet. Her eyes tracked the slow rise and fall of the curtain as air moved through the vent. Every sound felt amplified, every memory suddenly unguarded. When she closed her eyes, she didn't see the tunnel or the fight. She saw her father at the kitchen table, sleeves rolled up, hands steady as he fixed a radio that didn't need fixing. "You don't fight darkness by being louder," he'd said once. "You fight it by refusing to become it." She wondered if she had. The door opened softly. Declan didn't speak at first. He never rushed moments that mattered. He stood near the foot of the bed, helmet tucked under his arm, looking older than she remembered. Not weaker, just worn down by years of command that never really left you. "They're moving Graves to a secure facility," he said quietly. "He's denying everything." "Of course he is," Kira replied. "He asked about you." That surprised her. "What did you say?" Declan's mouth twitched. "That ghosts don't answer questions." She exhaled a faint laugh, then winced as pain flared. The laugh faded into something heavier. "They're going to bury this," she said. "Minimize it, say it was a rogue op, one bad admiral, a necessary correction." Declan didn't argue. "They always do." Silence stretched between them, not awkward, not empty. The kind that came when two people had carried the same weight from opposite ends of the rope. "You should have stayed dead," he said suddenly. She turned her head slowly. "You don't mean that." "No," he admitted. "I mean it would have been easier." She nodded. "It was easier for me too." He met her eyes then, really looked at her. "And yet here you are." Across the compound, behind reinforced glass and layers of clearance, Dmitry Volkov sat alone in a holding room, hands cuffed, posture rigid. He had refused food, refused sleep, not out of defiance but preparation. Men like him knew when the end of the road had finally appeared. When the door opened, he expected another interrogator. Instead, he got Kira. She stood across from him, arm in a sling, face pale but steady. She didn't sit. "They'll want a full confession," she said. "Timelines, names, roots." He nodded once. "And you?" "I want to know why my father trusted you." Volkov's gaze dropped for the first time since she'd known him. "He believed institutions could be corrected," Volkov said. "That truth was a pressure. It would eventually force change." "And you did." "I believed power adapts faster than morality." She absorbed that, let it settle. "He died believing something mattered," she said. "You lived believing nothing did." Volkov met her eyes, "And yet here we are." Later that day, Garrett stood on the hospital balcony, staring out at a skyline he hadn't really seen since before the war blurred everything. He didn't turn when Kira approached. He didn't need to. "I froze," he said suddenly. "In Albuquerque, I saw the muzzle flash, I saw her fall, and I froze." She leaned against the railing beside him. "You didn't freeze tonight," she said. "Because I thought you were dead already." "That's not why." He shook his head. "I've been carrying that moment for years, thought it defined me." She looked at him, really looked. The lines at the corners of his eyes, the way his shoulders no longer fully relaxed. "It didn't define you," she said. "It haunted you. There's a difference." He swallowed hard. "How do you live with it?" "You don't," she replied. "You walk with it. You let it remind you to move when it matters." News broke slowly, carefully, sanitized language, controlled outrage, an internal review, a restructuring, words designed to sound like justice without ever quite touching it. The hard drive helped. So did Volkov's testimony. So did Hart, who realized too late that loyalty was rarely reciprocated. Still, some names were never spoken aloud. Some files remained sealed, truth surfaced, but not all of it. Kira knew that would happen. What surprised her was how little it mattered. She stood at the edge of a training field weeks later, arm healed enough to move, body still stiff in the mornings. Recruits ran drills in the distance. Younger, faster, hungry in a way she no longer was. Declan joined her, hands in his pockets. "They want you back," he said. "Advisory role, no field ops, your choice." She considered it. For years, survival had been her only mission. Wake up, stay alive, gather proof, don't get seen. Now there were options. "I don't know who I am without a rifle," she admitted. Declan smiled faintly. "Neither do most of us. That's not the same as needing one." She watched a young woman struggle through a drill, fall, curse, get back up with stubborn determination written across her face. Kira felt something unfamiliar rise in her chest. Pride. "I'll stay," she said, "but not for medals, not for silence." "For what then?" "For her," Kira said, nodding toward the recruit, "so she doesn't have to disappear to be believed." That night, alone in her quarters, Kira opened a small box she'd carried through 3 countries and too many nights to count. Inside was her father's watch, scratched, stubborn, still ticking. She strapped it onto her wrist. Outside, the world kept turning, conflicted, imperfect, unfinished. So was she. But she was no longer invisible. Sometimes survival isn't about making it back alive. Sometimes it's about staying long enough to make the truth unavoidable. Understood. Here is part 5, written to match the same cinematic, emotional, voice-over-ready tone, 1,000 plus words, seamless, grounded, and immersive. What do you do when the war ends, but your hands are still shaking? Kira Blackwood noticed it first when she tried to pour coffee. The cup trembled just enough to spill a dark line across the counter, not from weakness, not from injury, from memory, the kind that didn't fade when the uniform came off. She stared at the spill for a moment longer than necessary, then wiped it away with her sleeve. No one was watching. No one needed to know. Outside her window, the base was waking up. Engines, voices, the rhythm of routine pretending everything was normal again. That was the lie everyone agreed to share. It made the days easier to move through. But inside her chest, the war was still unfinished. The debriefing room smelled like recycled air and caution. Glass walls, digital screens, men and women who spoke carefully like every word might become evidence later. Kira sat at the far end of the table, arms still healing, posture straight despite the ache in her spine. They didn't know where to put her. Officially, she didn't exist. Her death certificate still sat in a locked system somewhere, stamped and signed by people who now refused to meet her eyes. Unofficially, she was the reason several careers were unraveling in real time. That made people uncomfortable. "Let's focus on the operational failures," one analyst said, voice neutral, "not the emotional aspects." Kira didn't react. Declan did. "There are no emotional aspects," he said flatly, "only human ones." Silence followed. "Good." When the meeting ended, she stepped into the hallway alone. The lights hummed overhead. Somewhere, a door closed softly. The world kept moving as if nothing seismic had just been acknowledged. She leaned against the wall and let herself breathe. For 3 years she'd lived like a shadow, ate when she could, slept when it was safe, trusted no one fully. She had learned how to disappear inside herself, to shrink, to survive, to endure. Now everyone wanted her to reappear. She wasn't sure she remembered how. Garrett found her on the stairs later that afternoon, sitting with her back against the railing, boots stretched out in front of her like she'd run out of places to stand. "You okay?" he asked. She considered lying. "I don't know," she said instead. He sat beside her without comment. They didn't look at each other, didn't need to. "I keep thinking," he said after a while, "that if I'd moved faster, if I'd taken the shot sooner, Albuquerque wouldn't have happened." Kira closed her eyes. "If you had," she said quietly, "you'd be carrying a different ghost, not a lighter one." He nodded slowly, absorbing it, letting it hurt. "You ever regret coming back?" he asked. She opened her eyes, thought of the tunnel, the blood, the truth surfacing after years of suffocation. "No," she said, "I regret staying silent as long as I did." That night sleep came in fragments, short bursts interrupted by dreams that didn't feel like dreams. She stood in the desert again, felt the ground give way, heard the explosion that was supposed to erase her. But this time she didn't fall. She woke before dawn, heart racing, hand instinctively reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. Instead, she found the watch. Her father's, still ticking. She sat on the edge of the bed and let the sound anchor her. Proof that time hadn't stopped. That survival wasn't a glitch, it was a continuation. In another wing of the facility, Rebecca Hart stared at the ceiling of her holding cell, eyes dry and unblinking. She had stopped asking for a lawyer, stopped asking for water. She understood now how the system worked when it turned inward. No speeches, no redemption arcs. Just quiet removal. When the door opened, she expected guards. She got Kira. "You didn't have to come," Hart said. "I know. Are you here to hate me?" Kira shook her head. "I don't have the energy." Hart studied her, searching for something, anger, triumph, accusation. Finding none seemed to unsettle her more than any shouting ever could. "You could have let me die out there," Hart said. "Yes," Kira agreed, "but then you would have been a story someone else controlled." Hart laughed weakly. "You think truth wins?" "No," Kira said. "I think it shows up eventually, and that scares people more than lies." Hart looked away. Outside, weeks passed. Investigations widened, then narrowed. Names appeared in headlines, then disappeared beneath new ones. The world did what it always did, absorbed shock, adjusted, moved on. Kira watched from the edge. She trained again, not to deploy but to remember her body as something more than a weapon. She ran at dawn, lifted carefully, let scars stretch and complain and eventually quiet. One morning, she found herself standing on the range beside a group of new recruits. One of them, a young woman with dark hair pulled tight and doubt written all over her posture, kept missing the target by inches. "Mind if I help?" Kira asked. The recruit stiffened. "Ma'am, yes, no, I mean." Kira smiled faintly. "Breathe." She adjusted the woman's stance, her grip, her balance. "Don't force it," she said softly. "Let the moment come to you." The shot landed clean. The recruit stared at the target, then back at Kira, eyes wide. "How did you know?" she asked. Kira hesitated. "Because someone once told me," she said, "and it saved my life." That evening, Declan found her at the range long after everyone else had left. "You're different," he said. "So are you." He considered that. "They're building a case. It won't be clean, but it'll be something." She nodded. "I'm not doing this for justice," she said. "I'm doing it so the next person doesn't have to die to be heard." Declan looked at her with something like respect, not the loud kind, the quiet kind that lasted. Later, alone again, Kira stood by the window and watched the sun dip below the horizon. She thought about all the moments she'd survived by becoming smaller, quieter, less visible. She thought about how close she'd come to staying that way forever. The watch on her wrist ticked steadily. Time didn't care about lies. It moved anyway. And so did she. Sometimes strength isn't about fighting harder. Sometimes it's about refusing to disappear again. What remains when the story is finally told, but the echo still lingers. The day Kira Blackwood walked out of the compound, there were no cameras waiting, no speeches, no flags snapping in the wind, just a quiet morning and a gate that opened without ceremony. She paused there longer than necessary. Not because she was afraid to leave, but because for the first time in years, she didn't know what she was walking into. Survival had always been a narrow corridor. Forward was the only direction that existed. Now the horizon was wide, undefined, almost unsettling in its freedom. She stepped through anyway. The town beyond the base was unremarkable. A coffee shop opening its doors. A man walking a dog that pulled eagerly at the leash. Ordinary life in motion. The kind she'd watched from a distance, half invisible, never fully part of it. She sat on a bench near the water and listened. Wind against leaves, distant traffic, the quiet hum of people existing without knowing how fragile everything really was. She didn't resent them for it anymore. For a long time she had believed strength meant isolation. Carry it alone, don't ask, don't lean, endure. That belief had kept her alive, but it had also kept her hollow. Her phone buzzed. "Declan." Hearing set. "Graves will testify. Full immunity deal fell apart." She closed her eyes. "Thank you," she typed back. "Not for the update, for everything else." Another message followed, from Garrett. "I signed on as an instructor. Thought you should know." She smiled. A few months later, the hearings unfolded behind closed doors and heavily edited press releases. No one called it a conspiracy. No one admitted how close the system had come to eating its own. But files were unsealed. Patterns were acknowledged. Names, some of them, were spoken aloud. It wasn't the reckoning people imagined. It was quieter, more painful, and more real. Kira was asked to speak once, just once, not on television, not to a crowd, in a room with no windows and too many men who avoided her eyes. She told them about the tunnel, about being marked as expendable, about waking up to a world that had already mourned her and moved on. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. She just told the truth and let it sit there, heavy and unignorable. When she finished, no one clapped. That was fine. Weeks turned into months. She stayed on as an advisor, then quietly stepped away when she felt the balance shift from necessary to ornamental. She taught occasionally, mentored when asked, refused a medal she didn't feel belonged to her. Instead, she kept a small routine. Morning runs, coffee by the water, letters she never sent, written to a man who had believed the truth was worth dying for. One afternoon, she received a package with no return address. Inside was her father's old field notebook, the one she'd thought lost in Albuquerque. The pages were worn thin, filled with observations, sketches, and careful notes written in a hand she knew better than her own. On the last page, there was a sentence she didn't remember reading before. "If this ever costs me my life, let it buy you your freedom." She pressed the notebook to her chest and let herself cry. Not quietly, not efficiently, but honestly. Garrett visited her not long after, sitting across from her at a small wooden table scarred by use and sunlight. He looked lighter, not healed, but moving in the right direction. "I used to think bravery meant not feeling fear," he said. "Now I think it means carrying it without letting it decide for you." She nodded. "That sounds like something you should tell your students." He smiled. "I plan to." On her last day as an official anything, Kira returned to the range. The same one where she'd helped the recruit months earlier. The woman was there again, stronger now, steadier. She nodded when she saw Kira. "Ma'am," she said, "thank you for not disappearing." Kira felt the weight of that. She didn't correct the title, didn't deny the meaning. "Stay honest," she said, "with yourself most of all." That night, alone by the water, Kira watched the lights ripple across the surface and thought about the strange, uneven road that had led her here, about how survival hadn't been the miracle. Coming back had. Not to reclaim a role, not to seek vengeance, but to stand where the truth could no longer be erased. She checked the watch one last time before slipping it into her pocket. It still ticked, but she no longer needed the reminder. Some legacies aren't written in reports or carved into stone. They live in the moments when someone chooses not to look away. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.